You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron and to another edition of NFL Picks as we dive into the divisional round now of the NFL playoffs. We got 4 games on tap this weekend. Winners go to represent in the AFC and NFC championship games next week. We finished off last weekend 4-2, so we're hoping for some more right predictions. I invite you to comment down below. Let me hear your picks. Let me hear your thoughts on my picks. But we will dive in, starting with that very first matchup on Saturday at 4:30 p.m. This one's going to be on ESPN or ABC. We have the Houston Texans heading into Baltimore to take on the Ravens in what is one of the more unlikely matchups I think we could have potentially gotten, just thinking back to where the Texans were at the beginning of this season. Now, the Texans offense coming into this game is going to be put to the test against the Baltimore Ravens' #1 defense in terms of points allowed per game, coupled with the fact that they boast the 6th best pass defense in the NFL, allowing only 191 yards per game. The Texans, who have been a surprise to everybody, a top-flight offense throwing the football behind C.J. Stroud, again, gonna get tested this week. We're gonna see just how good this unit actually is. The Texans have been great in their own right, though, stopping the run, which is the bread and butter of the Baltimore Ravens, averaging 156 yards per game this season. They are the best rushing attack in the NFL, so it's not like the Texans come in and they don't have an answer for what the Ravens do as well. So I think both these teams come in with really good opportunities to slow down what the other team does really, really well. I will say that an ace in Baltimore's pocket could potentially be the return of tight end Mark Andrews. Charlie Kolar and Isaiah Likely have been working in his absence to try to make up for the production loss there, and they've actually done a pretty good job. But Houston's defense has struggled defending tight ends, allowing the 5th most yards to tight ends in 2023 with just over 1,000 yards total through the season. So that is something definitely worth keeping an eye on. The Texans themselves are also dealing with a fair amount of injuries. Wide receiver Noah Brown was lost in last week's win over the Browns, and on top of that, we got a very long list of questionables here in defensive ends Jonathan Grenard and Will Anderson, Jerry Hughes, wide receiver John Mechie's on there, linebackers Blake Cashman and Christian Harris. You also have defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins and Malik Collins. There's a handful of guys coming into this game that you have to be concerned about potentially missing going into a game against the AFC's very best. A key to this game, though, I do think will be Baltimore forcing the Texans into mistakes here, because the Texans themselves, best in the NFL when it comes to protecting the football. They had only 14 offensive turnovers this past season. However, the Ravens this year finishing with the most takeaways on defense with 31. I do think that if the Ravens can force the Texans into some mistakes, they have a really good shot at winning this. However, if the Texans can avoid those mistakes to protect the football, they're right in the thick of this, in my opinion. I don't really think that the Ravens are going to steamroll this unit. This Texans team has played very good as of late, especially in this back half of the season. C.J. Stroud playing on another level, and again, doing an excellent job not putting the ball into harm's way. He has fantastic ball placement, and I do think that there is a good chance that maybe Houston surprises some people here. But I do think turnovers in Baltimore forcing the Houston Texans into them will be something that makes a massive difference in the outcome of this game. Another key in this matchup here that I'm looking at is also going to be the offensive lines and how they hold up versus the others' defensive fronts here. The Texans, while they're sitting around middle of the pack in terms of sack totals, they are 5th in the NFL in terms of pressure rate this season, pressuring quarterbacks on just over 25%, nearly 26% of dropbacks, whereas the Ravens, while they're about 19% pressure rate, somewhere around middle of the pack, they do lead the league in sacks with 60 on the year. So there is a lot to look at in this game here. I don't think it's as cut and dry, just take the favorite. I do think that the Houston Texans have a good opportunity to maybe make some noise and surprise some people. However, though, I do think I'm going to lean with the favorite in Baltimore on this one. I think just on paper, when you look at both these teams and the way they stack up, the Houston Texans are in such an unlikely scenario to come out victorious in this game here. And the Ravens, in my opinion, have been the definitive best football team in the NFL since they beat the 49ers and potentially even beyond that as well. So I am going to side with the Ravens here, and I have them winning 27-21. I think it's going to be a fun contest, but ultimately, similar to what people are saying about the Packers, Texans kind of playing with house money, I would say even more so than the Green Bay Packers at this stage of the game here, but I do think it's going to be a fun contest, and I could see the Texans hanging in there. So give me the Ravens 27-21, not a blowout by any means, but I think a very fun and interesting contest. Next, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at the other Saturday game. This one's going to be at 8:15 p.m. You'll catch this one on Fox as the Green Bay Packers step into Levi's Stadium to take on the San Francisco 49ers. I think the biggest thing that stands out in this game to me is going to be the health of both of these teams. San Fran comes in basically just wondering if Dre Greenlaw is going to be able to go for them, but overall, they either already have been knowing what their unit is going to look like for the most part coming into this matchup, getting a week off, and I know that there was some questions around Christian McCaffrey, but it sounds like he's going to be good to go as well. Dre Greenlaw is really the only significant person here that they're, worried about. Whereas when you look at the Green Bay Packers, and as has been a theme for pretty much the entirety of this season now, they're dealing with a laundry list of questionables here. They have 14 total guys listed on that injury report, with guys like Preston Smith, Christian Watson, Jayden Reed. You also have Jair Alexander on there, who had a big interception last week. I do think that you need to seriously consider, when deciding what you want to do with this game, just how long that injury report is on the Green Bay Packers side of things. I will say that the numbers also just heavily stack against Green Bay going into this matchup as well. With an emerging running game with Aaron Jones coming into play as of late here, they're definitely going to be tested against the 49ers' third best ranked run defense in the NFL. On top of that, San Fran has allowed the third fewest points per game this season at only 17.5, so the Packers' ability to score is going to be put to the test. And on top of that, the Green Bay Packers, who have struggled to defend the run all season long, ranking as the fourth worst run defense in the league, are going up against a 49ers team that loves to run the football, with Christian McCaffrey averaging a career best 91.2 yards per game on the ground this year. And that's not to talk about his entire 2,000 yards from scrimmage that he's had as a dual threat running back. The numbers just do not favor the Packers in this one here, and I have such a hard time betting against San Francisco in here. But that's not to say that there isn't a window of opportunity for Green Bay. I do think that is worth at least mentioning here. If the Green Bay Packers want to win this game, it's kind of simple, but it's not necessarily simple in actual practice. Jordan Love has to be great against this 49ers defense. That's basically the only way that they come out victorious here. He cannot have a good game. He cannot have a average game or below average game. They need to have him have a fantastic game. San Francisco can be thrown against, and that has been seen throughout the large majority of this season. They allow about 214 yards a game, which is good for about 14th in the NFL. So they are middle of the road against the pass. However, you do have to deal with that vaunted defensive front that can create pressure and get to the quarterback. So Jordan Love needs to be great. He needs to be accurate. He needs to get the football out quickly. And if he does so, there is a good chance that he could maybe find some holes in this San Francisco defense. I do think, though, that a key area to watch for both of these teams, and something that could be a true deciding factor on whether Green Bay upsets or not, is going to be who wins on third down offensively. Both of these teams are top 5 in third down conversion rate this season. Packers are number 5 and the 49ers are number 4. And then on the flip side of things, defensively, both these teams not so great when it comes to stopping teams on third down. The Packers rank 25th, the 49ers rank 24th. They are literally neck and neck in terms of comparison when it comes to third down conversion rate, both offensively and defensively allowed. So there is a shot and a window of opportunity for Green Bay. But in my opinion, there's just way too much talent, way too much momentum going through San Francisco right now. And I know that that loss to the Baltimore Ravens that they had a few weeks ago left a very sour taste in their mouth. And I have a hard time believing that San Francisco is not going to do everything in their power to find themselves in the Super Bowl to play those Ravens again, or at least have the opportunity to do so. So I think I'm going to take San Francisco here. I have them winning 30-23. Injuries and a leaky defense just really concerns me with Green Bay right now. I do think there is an opportunity for Jordan Love to maybe shine and have a really good game here, but there is just way too much loaded up on San Francisco's side, in my opinion, and with them being healthy, it just makes it a very hard sell for me to take the Green Bay Packers. Next, we'll move into Sunday's game here, and the first game we'll look at here, Tampa Bay being hosted by the Detroit Lions, a Buccaneers team that a lot of people probably did not expect to be here, but they are here, and they got here in a dominant fashion as well with their win over the Philadelphia Eagles. And we have the Detroit Lions, their first playoff victory in 30 some odd years. I had never seen one in my entire life. I am 28 years old, and that was the first Detroit Lions playoff win I have ever personally witnessed. Now, if you like passing-oriented football, this is probably going to be the game for you if I had to guess. Both these defenses struggle against the pass. The Lions are ranked 27th. The Bucs are ranked 29th. And both of these offenses can throw the football with the best of them as long as everything is clicking. I feel like the Lions less so than the Buccaneers. There are some games that you can look back on this year where the passing attack just kind of fell flat on its face with the Lions. But the Buccaneers, they're more of a consistency type of problem when it comes to their passing game. When they're on, they are on. But when they're off, my goodness, are they off? And it just seems like Baker cannot connect with the wide receivers. Whether it's one person's fault or the other, we'll not get into that. But consistency has been an issue with the passing game for the Bucs. But again, when they're on, they are as threatening as anyone with the wide receiver corps that they have, with the wide receiver core that they have, and with the potential of a renewed rushing attack. Now things can really open up in the play action. They can be on. Now, an area to keep an eye on in this game, speaking of rushing attacks, is going to be who can actually establish a solid rushing attack in this game here. Both of these defenses are very tough up front. Both are top 5 in terms of yards per game allowed this year against the run. The Buccaneers sitting at 5th with 95 yards per game, and the Lions are 2nd with 88 yards per game. Now, the Lions having a 1-2 punch at running back with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are obviously a problem. That offense has averaged 135 yards per game on the ground this year. No secret to anybody. They can run the football. They are the 5th best rushing attack in the NFL. The Bucs, though, meanwhile, they have struggled for stretches this season to run the football, but have at least consistently been better in the back half of the season than they were in the first half. Their season average was 88 yards per game. However, if you go back to week 12, where the running game kind of sorted itself out for them, they've been averaging about 107 yards per game, which makes them far more competitive when you compare them to the Lions, who have just been good all season long at running the football. So whoever can establish a more consistent rushing attack, in my opinion, could obviously jump out and maybe take a significant lead in this game. As for team health, both teams relatively healthy. There's not really a ton of concerns on either side. You have a few questionables with Detroit with Frank Ragnow, Alex Anzalone, and Khalif Raymond. And then on the Bucs, you're just kind of looking at Shaq Barrett and Chris Godwin. But to have just 2 and 3 guys respectively going in with injury concerns that are just questionables, and they're, whether they're limited participants or maybe they're just trying to take as much time to get ready for next week as possible because they came up with a stinger in the game previous, that's not too bad either. Again, you could be the Green Bay Packers coming in with 14 people listed as questionable going into this game and uncertain of just who the hell is going to be playing for you in that matchup. I do think, though, that something to keep an eye on in this game and something that could be a true deciding factor is going to be the turnovers. Whoever can come away with the big turnover, ultimately, I think, could potentially come away with the win here. And this is kind of the opening that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to potentially steal a victory in Detroit on this one. Tampa Bay has been great taking care of the football. They have only 18 offensive turnovers on the season. The Lions themselves sitting with a few more at 23. Whoever's defense comes up with that big takeaway, and both defenses have been pretty good at taking the football away. I wouldn't say great by any stretch, but they have all been pretty good for the most part. I do think potentially could decide how this game ends up finishing up. As for who I think comes out victorious, though, if I was to pick a game where an upset would happen, this is probably the game, in my opinion. I do think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a legitimate shot to upset the Lions here. Again, when they're on, they are on, and they can be as competitive as anyone in this playoff bracket right now. However, Detroit is a more complete team. They've been more consistent, in my opinion. You're in Detroit as well. You have a wave of momentum going behind you right now. Detroit wants a Super Bowl trip, and they want it bad. And to be at home again this week with all the momentum behind you, I'm having a hard time betting against the Lions. So I'm leaning Lions. I have them winning 25-23. Kind of an odd score line, but I could see the Lions maybe going for 2 somewhere here or there. Dan Campbell and his willingness to go for it on 4th down, his willingness to go for 2-point conversions to make statements. I could see an odd score line coming out of this one here, but I have the Lions winning 25-23. And then to wrap up the picks for the week, the final one of the weekend at Sunday, 6:30 p.m., on CBS, a rivalry renewed once again, the new era's version of Tom Brady versus Peyton Manning. We have Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes with a series split of 3-3, both sides having won 3 games apiece against the other since both these quarterbacks took over at their respective starting spots. This matchup could not be billed any bigger. I'm not surprised it's the final game of the weekend, and I'm ready for it. Now, when you look at this matchup and how it kind of divvies out, I have to start by saying we have 2 excellent defenses that, in my opinion, headline this game here. I know it's the quarterback conversation and everyone loves it, but these 2 defenses cannot be ignored. I'm not going to come in here and just talk about Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes. We've got to look at these defenses in the way that they've played this season because they are a large part of why both of these teams even found themselves in the playoffs, considering some of the offensive woes that they both dealt with throughout the stretch of this season. The Chiefs coming in, allowing a measly 17.3 points per game. That is second lowest in the NFL, and the Bills not too far behind them at just 18.3. They're 4th lowest in the NFL. Both teams can shut down the passing attacks of their opponents. The Chiefs 4th in the NFL to the Bills 7th in the NFL, separated by about 20 yards allowed per game between the two. And then both have a similar weakness. They can be susceptible to allowing teams to run the football. The Bills 15th in the NFL, allowing about 110 yards per game. The Chiefs just a few yards more at 113. They're sitting at 18th. They're very similar defenses in their strengths and their weaknesses. Now, outside of defensive stuff, offensively, I do think there's a player to watch from both sides that I think are worth taking note of, because these are players that if the opposing defense can shut them down, puts them in a much better spot to potentially win this game. When you look at KC's side of things, Rashee Rice is someone you cannot ignore at this point. He had nearly 1,000 yards receiving this season, 7 receiving touchdowns off of almost 80 catches. He had a phenomenal year 1 as a rookie and has emerged as wide receiver 1 for Kansas City. And you look at his last 2 games, he had 13 receptions, 257 yards, which was good for nearly 20 yards per catch in those 2 games, with a touchdown to be the cherry on top. Locking him up is key for Buffalo, because if you can lock him up, he's kind of what's helped reopen the Chiefs offense a little bit. If you can lock him up, we're now looking at a Chiefs offense going back to like mid-season where they were just having a really hard time moving the football or even sniffing the red zone to potentially put some touchdowns on the board. On the flip side of things for Buffalo, I think James Cook is the guy you really got to highlight for this offense here. I have been pounding the table for what feels like years now, basically in the 3 years that I have been doing this podcast. James Cook has brought the running game that this Buffalo Bills team has desperately needed during the Josh Allen era. When you look at his numbers from 2023, averaging 4.7 yards per attempt, he put up 1,122 yards on the ground with a couple of touchdowns to boot. Obviously, Josh Allen, the one that seems to eat up all the rushing touchdowns on the team, he has 15, so I'm not really surprised there. But that 1,122 yards with that 4.7 yards per attempt, the Bills have not even sniffed that in the Josh Allen era. James Cook has brought balance to this offense and has turned them into a true Super Bowl contending type of offense. Before, it was all about Josh Allen and what he could do to opposing defenses, and he's great, don't get me wrong, but he is prone to making a mistake here or there. Granted, he has been pretty good in the playoffs, but he is prone to making that bone-crushing mistake. And to have a guy like James Cook who can take a few of those touches out of his hands and help make things easier for him so he does not have to be Superman every single play, even if it is fun to watch, is phenomenal for this team. And I mean, you look back to that game against Dallas when you saw him throw, I forget what the attempts number was. What he had 8 attempts or something like that. It was something ludicrous, or completions. I forget the number. It was extremely low, but he had 179 yards on the ground from James Cook in that matchup. He is a true running back 1, and one that needs to be shut down if Kansas City wants to come away with a victory here. So those are my 2 kind of players to highlight here. But the one thing that I think is a key factor for this game that really sticks out to me, and I think could ultimately dictate who comes out victorious here, is going to be who has the better ability to finish drives with touchdowns specifically. I'm not talking field goals. I'm talking specifically finishing drives with touchdown, especially getting into the red zone. You look at the Bills, and they are the 6th best team in the NFL in turning red zone trips into touchdowns. In comparison to the Chiefs, they are 17th. And this is compounded by the fact that when you look at the red zone trips from these two teams, the Chiefs have 61 trips this year. The Bills have 65. They're only separated by 4 red zone trips. That is a little bit of a concern, in my opinion, when you look at the Chiefs and their potential chance at winning this game here. If they can't get into the end zone, especially when you're getting inside the 20 and you're settling for field goals, this is a Buffalo Bills team that knows how to get into the end zone, especially in the red zone. And now you have Dawson Knox back in the fold. We saw the Bills make it a point last week to really feed him the football. He caught the first touchdown of the game for the Bills. They have 2 big tight ends in Dawson Knox and in Dalton Kincaid. You have legit red zone threats in guys like obviously Stephon Diggs. Gabe Davis can be a threat when he needs to be. If you can't score touchdowns as KC when you're getting into the red zone, I'm a little bit concerned about their chances on winning here. And with that kind of leads me to who I think wins, and I'm leaning with Buffalo on this one. I have them winning 27-26, and that scoreline is kind of indicative of what I think is going to end up happening here. I could see the Bills finding the end zone 2 or 3 times, scoring touchdowns. Maybe they have to settle for a field goal or 2, but the Chiefs, if you look at that 26 here, we're talking maybe like 4 field goals from them, maybe a couple of scores in the end zone, but it ultimately, in my opinion, comes down to just the Chiefs not being able to finish drives. And even with some of the positives we've seen from them recently with Rashee Rice, you can't ignore some of the miscommunication or just like the dropped passes we've been getting between Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and just their inability to finish drives when they get in the red zone. So that is kind of what worries me about Kansas City and why I'm leaning towards Buffalo for this win. And I know if you're watching this by now, you're probably like, oh, he just picked all the favorites. No chance in hell that's going to happen. Listen, I'm not doing betting odds here. I'm picking winners for fun. And I'm going to be honest with you. Yeah, is it unlikely that all 4 of the favorites end up winning this game here? Sure, absolutely. But when I sit down and look at all 4 of these games, I just have a hard time buying the lesser teams winning their matchups right now, because I do think that the better teams are in positions to come out victorious, and they should be winning these games. That's just kind of how I'm looking at it right now. And as I mentioned, like with the Tampa Bay Detroit game, if I was to pick an upset, I would not be too surprised if Tampa Bay has another really good game offensively and they don't, miss throws here and there. We're not seeing dropped catches, because we do see that from Tampa Bay a lot. I wouldn't be shocked if they pull off an upset, and I wouldn't be shocked if KC pulls off the upset in this game. But I do think that the favorites this week are more clear favorites than they have been in recent memory, at least in the divisional round. So I like all 4 of the favorites this weekend. That's just my opinion. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I'm right, I'm right. We'll find out next weekend. But that is it for me. If you made it to the very end, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me. Again, I invite you to comment down below, discuss your thoughts, your opinions on your picks, my picks, and everything in between. But I will see you all next time. Have a good one.